Don't ever let them make you think they care because they're looking out for the well-being of trans people. They don't like your feelings. It's entirely personal. They don't like the way you feel and they want to attack you and your insecurities. The reason people identify as transtrenders is because they put trans people on a pedestal and they recognize that. During a period of time where they were seeing trans positivity, due to their inability to assess the situation, they failed to acknowledge the fact that this is a reaction against a transphobic world. When people see on Tumblr posts that, like, trans boys are angels, what they see is this. Trans people are special. Everyone thinks trans people are special. Trans people are put on a pedestal. This is a key point where it's time to stop if you're at this part of the transtrender slippery slope. Just sit back and wait. Observe. Are trans people really treated better than others in society? Is this just something you perceive as part of your social circle? Do your friends act in a supportive way towards trans people, or do they just support them in words? There are some key contradictions here. The trans people that they don't like are still equally disposable in a way that most cis transphobes don't go so far as. Cis transphobes mostly see trans people as a curiosity or alien or somewhat inhuman. Transphobia within the trans community manifests on a much more sinister and deeper level. The qualm is less with the appearance of defying gender roles, but with the whole person. Transphobes within the trans community have a hatred of what they see as the essentiality of being trans. They have a hatred for people experiencing dysphoria. They have a hatred for people with dysphoria commiserating together. They hate the needs that those groups of people express. They want to isolate and starve out these groups. Their hatred rests on the deep inner desires of the trans person. They hate the part inside you that drives you to need community and support. They hate transness itself. The transphobia from people inside the transtrender pipeline is much more disgusting than the confusion and misunderstanding of cis people. Transtrenders have a predatory urge to take the vulnerability of people experiencing dysphoria and lay it outside of the safe space for cis people and new trans community to spit on. What they hate is the solidarity and vulnerability that trans people express with each other. What's happening inside the mind of a transtrender is much more deep. The root of their transphobia is in despising someone who was different as a child. They hate the idea of young trans people embodying their own gender. Taking away the safe space from gender non-conforming kids is rooted in the in-group safety that these new trans people experienced by not being born trans. They look for that vulnerability and keep dragging it out through the life of the trans person so they can never feel safe. What's really important to them, the emotional profile and what's inside of a transtrender, is completely the opposite of what they profess, because partially the denial is so deep that shame would probably break them if they became conscious of how evil towards trans people they really are. What's important to them is not making the world a more comfortable place for trans people, body positivity, and people being free. It's maintaining the status quo where people of different types of bodies always feel excluded. The essentiality of the transtrender position is that being born different is wrong. It's unacceptable to have the differently born people because representing them would be a shame and a blight on the trans community. There was never any danger in the idea that being trans could be biologically valid as well as a choice, because there's no way to verify which trans person is one or the other. It's a matter of an identity that they want to take away. It can exist alongside being trans as a choice. There's no threat to them. They just can't handle being told they're different. They just want to take space away from anyone who doesn't conform. It's my way or the highway. And they hate dysphoria, being born different, and gender nonconformity. They disassemble their transphobia to hide the totality of what it is. They hate to see you find what makes you feel real. They hate to see you find community. They hate your solidarity in the idea of you not feeling like shit. They spend hours of every day imagining trans suffering, trans people being invalidated and raped, trans people being murdered and in poverty. They do this because they think on some level that trans people are better than them. Their transphobia begins at lack of understanding. They fill in the blanks by thinking that it's a choice, a principled choice to do something for an external reason. They moralize being trans. Then by the time someone comes to explain what and why being trans is, they're not open to understanding anymore. They're locked into being transphobes. Another part of it is being invulnerable. What makes you feel invulnerable is being in this neo-trans community that protects you from criticism on an ideological level. What makes me feel invulnerable is being with people who relate and can validate my experience on a personal level. The people that feel comfortable in the trans community are seeing and addressing different threats. People who are true scum address threats that are on different lines. They're not insulated by a community that accepts queer theory. There's no ideology for them to lean on in their area, and they're responsible for pioneering the existence of trans people in the community. While we're waiting for the trans community to come to our area, we're justifying our existence on an individual level. We may not see the tide of progress, and we can't wait to start existing as trans when that tide comes. Our arguments are designed for different positions. And when people who are coddled and secluded within the trans community push out people who are still making space in their area, they stop that space from being made. They only want people who are in a certain area to be comfortable living as trans. People who are rural and are still out there, trying to pioneer space, have urban trans people trying to snuff out their work in their life because they feel their ideology needs to control trans people. They don't see their ideology as serving trans people, but as trans people serving their ideology. This is queer theory. Queer theory takes this approach. I know it's better for you, and I'm going to take away what you want for yourself because it's not appropriate or beneficial. Queer theory works towards and for those who already have what they need. It works to exclude those who need something. It makes transphobes out of people, whether those people realize it or not. What we went through on Tumblr was dehumanizing, and that dehumanization is at the root of this transphobia. Because this particular transphobia is based on attaining that pedestal that is being trans. People who never humanized trans people, never saw that trans people can be flawed, and never saw them as equals, fight to attain a perfection that never existed, to hoard and deny others it for being imperfect.